Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our meeting. I'm going to ask Ralph Bullard if he would lead us in prayer. And Ralph, if you could come up here to do that, please. And then we'll let David Swafford, retired United States Captain, United States Navy, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you could please come up here, Ralph, we'll get started.
You pray with me. Holy Father, we are grateful you've chosen to reveal yourself to us. We're grateful for our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Grateful, Lord, that you have declared us spotless because we are in his blood, not our sin. We're thankful, Father, for the gift of liberty. We're thankful, Father, for the desire of people to restore the liberty we've lost and maintain for our children. So we pray for the program today, that it might be one that gives us direction and a great encouragement and a degree of wisdom that we need. Bless our nation. Turn our hearts back to you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. I want to, at this point in time, thank Hugh, Captain Hugh Smith. Is he around here? Is he awake? Hugh, where are you, Hugh? Well, actually, Hugh was up all night last night, and he's been walking around, kind of looks like a zombie to me. But Hugh is actually the person behind bringing these real heroes here today to speak to us. Hugh is a former Navy, a member of the United States Navy. He is currently a merchant marine, and he captains any variety of types of ships and things like that.
Anyone that'll have him?
Yeah, anyone that'll have him. And I think they're using those garbage barges, aren't they, out there, you know, or something of that nature. I'm giving him a hard time. But Hugh has actually paid for these gentlemen to come here and put them up and things, and he very much wants to give these an opportunity, these two men, an opportunity to tell their story. And as I've said before, I'm a supporter of Israel, and I think that what happened back in 1967 is one of the darkest times in the relationships between Israel and the United States that has ever existed. Anyway, please thank Hugh. Would you give him a hand for bringing this? Must have awakened from the little nap he was taking here, you know. So we're going to go ahead and get on with our program now. And I apologize, I didn't ask which of the two of you wanted to go first.
Hugh.
So, okay. Hugh, did you want to say something?
Well, I'll say this a little bit.
Yeah, don't cut into their time too much like I have already. And so...
I've been studying this subject for a while, and it's always puzzled me. It's always made me mad. And but then I got to thinking, you know, it was 1967. I was looking up what was going on in 1967. Ronald Reagan had just taken office as the governor that month. You know. And Ali had said that he was not going to sign up for the military and was stripped of his boxing title. The first spaghetti western with Clint Eastwood came out, you know. So, and at the time I was in Rota, Spain, the last port that they went before they were attacked, and so that's my only connection to it. I was a Navy grad on that day, so.
Okay.
But I was real glad to get hold of these guys. It was real easy on Facebook.
Okay, good.
I'm very proud of it.
Well, first one representing the United States Navy will be Jack Beattie. Beattie, excuse me. Jack, if you would please come up here. And I think you were a chief, is that correct? And you'll be speaking from here, Jack.
Oh, okay.
You'll be speaking from here. I believe you were a chief of some type, if I'm not mistaken. And I was an Army ROTC, so I'm not as familiar with the Navy ranks as I am the Army. But anyway, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
He's flown here from Detroit, Michigan, and we're looking very much forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jack Beattie. I was on the USS Liberty on 8 June 1967.
A little closer.
And I'm one of the survivors, along with my fellow Marine over here, and one of the survivors. And what we're going to tell you about today is a true story. I'm not sure where to start, but we can start about what the Liberty was. The Liberty was a World War II ship that was in mothballs. They recommissioned it. They retrofitted it into one of the latest and greatest and the best spy ships there was. This was back in 1966, I believe. Their mission statement was to, out of Norfolk, Virginia was the home port of the Liberty, and they did 4-month cruises over to the west coast of Africa. And they patrolled up and down the west coast of Africa. And their job was to monitor what was going on at the time over there. The communists were there, the Cubans were in there, and that was, I believe, the mission. Bryce will talk more about that. He was in the communication department more than I was in the engineering department. We basically ran the ship and drove it. But anyways, I made one cruise over on the Liberty, 4-month deployment, and then back to Norfolk, 2 months in the yards, and then the second trip back over to Africa. I have to give you one highlight though. If you're on the Liberty and you do a complete cruise, you're going to cross the equator. Now, I don't know if there's anybody in here that's a shellback or a pollywog, but let me tell you, look, they're waving their hands. My first steps on the Liberty in Norfolk, when I went up the gangplank, the petty officer of the watch looked at me. I was 18 years old. I looked pretty drifty. I didn't know anything. And he looked at me, he says, "You gotta be a pollywog." And I said, and I had no idea what he's talking about. Well, hence from then on, the harassment and started for the whole 2 months until we crossed the equator. So that's my story about crossing the equator. Because the people have done it know. Once you cross the equator, you're a shellback for life, and you only do it once. So anyways, I was assigned to the engineering. The first time when I got on the ship, they put me down in the bilge, down in the whole B division, which is the boiler gang, black gang, whatever you want to call it. It's probably the dirtiest, hottest job on the ship. The ship was oil fired, had 2 boilers, and I worked down there. And ultimately, there was a job opening in the machine shop, and everybody wanted that in engineering because the machine shop was air conditioned and it was better duty. For some reason, I got picked, so I got out of B division, went in the A division, auxiliary division, and our job was to maintain all the auxiliary equipment on the ship, from the anchor windlass to the air conditioning to the galley equipment, and also all the diesel engines. So on that fateful day, it was a clear day, like today, no clouds. The sun was out. It was in the afternoon. We just got done doing a GQ, General Quarters Drill, which the captain was grilling us pretty good while we were over off the coast of Israel. We were 13 miles off the coast because you can see the sand in the background, and I know you can see 12 miles. Is that correct? Yep. 12 miles to the horizon. We were back farther. There was planes that circled us. I seen personally twice, we seen planes circle us. One time, it was a boxcar, flying boxcar that we waved to the pilots. And I think there's 4 or 5 times they circled the ship in the few days before the attack. And we had what was that? I'm sorry, 6 times. There you go. I personally seen them twice come over the ship. They knew who we were, there's no doubt about it. But on that day, the weather, there was a 5 to 8 knot wind, I believe. I was outside on the main deck when the attack started. We were in the machine shop. We had orders to go up to the motor whale boat, which hangs over the side of the ship. And they usually have someone man overboard. They would put this boat in the water and retrieve the person. Well, we were going to work on the diesel engine that day. Mike Shaley, he was a 2nd or 3rd class engineman, and I was E3, a fireman. So we went up there, we're in the boat, starting to do this PM, they call it, planned maintenance. And beautiful day. And I noticed that the lookouts up on the bridge were pointing up towards the sun and in their binoculars looking. And so we're looking, and the next thing you know, the bridge explodes. There was either a rocket or cannon, I'm not sure. The whole bridge was engulfed in flame. Right away, general quarters was sounded. That's the battle stations. We jumped out of that boat. Mike Shaley went forward to his position, and I was going aft. And it was just 4 or 5 seconds later, that boat took a rocket and blew it right over the side. There was nothing. There was literally just the 2 davits left. So hence from there, I went down below. My GQ station was emergency fire pump room, which is right down in the bottom of the ship. It's right next to the machine shop. There's a hatch that goes down probably 30 feet down a ladder on a tube. And I was down there. The room's like about 12 by 12. And in that room is a large fire pump. It's electric fire pump. If they lose fire main system in the ship, it's a backup system, so you have pressure for like the fire hydrants and that. So I had the sound powered phones on. I got orders right away, light that pump off, get it going. So it's a matter of opening some valves, starting the motor. It's 100 horsepower, it's very noisy. And as I had the phones on, you could hear the rockets and cannon and machine gun hitting the side of the ship. I'm below the waterline now. So I'm pacing back and forth. I'm by myself. It's only a one-man station. Then there was a lull in the shooting, and I was on the phones, and it was massive confusion on the phones. There was fires. You could hear all the people calling in from different stations on the ship, needing stretcher bearers and corpsmen and more fire main pressure. And ultimately, they said, stand by for torpedo attack, starboard side. So I'm pacing around, and here's the bulkhead here, and I says, that's the starboard side, you know. I'm right here, I says. So I got the phone on, and I got in with that traffic, the people talking. I says, request permission to leave the emergency fire pump. And they said, wait one, Navy time, mean just stand by. Well, I wasn't gonna stand by. I was going up the ladder with the cord, and I opened the hatch and just got out, and they said, get out of there right away. So as they said that, the torpedo entered the ship and blew up. And it was right next to that compartment where I was at. That compartment took some water, probably 2 or 3 feet. And where I was at, it flipped me around like a rag doll. And the bulkheads collapsed. There was smoke coming down the passageway. And I immediately ran to my left to go to, to get topside. And that's when I passed that CT room. The door was open, which was always locked. It had a combination code there. Well, that door was open that day, which is like I'd never looked inside there. And that's where that hatch was up, and water was coming up over the top, and they were pulling people out. And I believe you were one of them. Maybe. I'm not sure where you were.
Still down there.
You were still down there. Well, that was, to me, it was just like in the movies. Water was coming up, guys were screaming, there was people injured around there. And then finally, we went a little bit topside to get outside. Ultimately, that hatch was closed. They were screaming down in there, and the water was coming up, so someone made us close the hatch. We had to, so up one level to go out to where my lifeboat was at, because they said prepare to abandon ship. That was another order that came across from the captain. There was a whole line of us to go out this one hatch. We opened the hatch door, and they literally machine gunned that whole side of the ship, and we pulled the door back shut. We hunkered down, and we're going around the ship just shooting at anything, so. We literally stayed there for several hours. There was the whole passageway, it was full of wounded. It was pretty brutal. We had one third-class corpsman at the time. He was up where I was at, and third class is like right out of school. They're just corpsmen, and he had all kinds of casualties. I'll never forget, we had one guy, his face was full of blood, and he was screaming. I don't know who he was a CT, I think. A communication technician, And he was screaming, screaming. And we couldn't go outside. Shells were coming through the bulkhead. And the corpsman said, pick him up and flush his eyes out. That's it. So me and another fella, we picked him up. There was a sink there, a little bit of water coming out. There was no water pressure. And we washed his face out. And we set him down. He calmed down. To this day, I still don't know who that guy was. And I don't know whatever happened to him. But anyways, we hunkered down there. We had no idea who attacked us. The ship was about 10, 12 degree less, I believe. There was fires. They dropped napalm on us. They machine gunned the life rafts. The rafts that got in the water, they shot up. We literally had no place to go. So that, we said, well, we can't go outside. So ultimately, the attack stopped. We finally got a message out to the fleet, I believe, and the Israelis said, we're sorry, it was a mistake. I won't believe this to this day. The ship has markings on it. We have pictures of it there. On 4 sides of the ship, and the bow, port and starboard, the stern, port and starboard, is GTR. It's about 5 feet high in white letters, and on the back of the ship is Liberty. The flag was up. I was outside. I seen the flag. You can hear a flag snapping in the breeze when it's windy, and I remember that. As far as being a mistaken identity, it's too hard to believe. The ship, the next day, we had 2 destroyers. We had no assistance. We got a message out. We wanted some, Bryce knows more about what the communication was than I do. We had some planes scramble from the fleet. They turned them back by orders of the President and McNamara, I believe. And we had no flyover, nobody. We were on fire, sinking the whole night. The next day, early in the morning, the USS Davis and the Massey, the 2 destroyers, they steamed all night. They came alongside the next morning. They brought, I believe, 20 guys on board. They had to shore up this bulkhead that was bowed out, literally bowed out. If that would have broke, the ship would have sunk. It would have flooded too much of the ship. And there were some corpsmen and some food they brought on board now. And finally, we got underway about 4 knots, I believe, and we cruised to Malta, which took...
Were you being towed, or was it you?
No, we were actually under power, and slow speed, I think 4 knots, about 5 days to get there, Bryce, something like that. You don't know, yeah. I believe, Bryce will tell you his story. He might have been lifted off. And as we're going back, we had the USS Popsicle. It's an ocean-going tug that was following us because we had classified information. The torpedo went in a classified area, blew up, killed 25 people in that compartment. 9 guys were killed out on the main deck. They tried to recover what information was drifting out in the ocean, and divers went down, tried to put a big tarp over the hull, which doesn't work. So they picked up what debris we had coming out. We finally got to Malta, which is a little island in the Mediterranean. It's British control, I believe, and we went in the dry dock there. The ship, I have pictures of the ship in dry dock. As the water went out, there was 25 dead people, dead sailors down there. The volunteers were the CTs that went down to recover the dead. It was a mess. It was full of black oil, salt water, and the bodies were down there for 4 or 5 days. They did that on their own, and we recovered everybody back out of there. The ship was patched up, painted, and we took the ship back to Norfolk. I was on the crew that brought it back. The ship creaked and cracked and groaned. The keel was bent on it. And finally it was back to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Portsmouth, Norfolk area, I believe. And the ship was ultimately scrapped. But it was a harrowing experience. We had Admiral Kidd come on board the ship. When we were going back to Malta, they brought him over on a boat or however, and we talked to him. I was in my rack laying there, and I looked up. I was 19 years old, and I see this belt buckle there with 3 stars on it, 2 or 3 stars. And everybody jumped, attention on deck, and he's drinking coffee. And he was just talking like a regular person. And finally he says, you guys keep your mouth shut in this thing. If you talk to anybody, you'll end up in Leavenworth Prison. Well, as an E3, zip it. And I never talked about it for like 15 years. So hence that, and we finally had a reunion in Washington, D.C., and the crew got together.
What year?
81.
1981. We had a pretty good turnout. The captain, I believe the captain was there that one. The captain received the Medal of Honor. He stayed up on the bridge the whole time. He was shot up. Everybody was killed or wounded on the bridge. But it was one of the most decorated ships for a single action in the Navy. I gotta just read this here to you because I can't keep track of how many. There was 1 Medal of Honor, 2 Navy Crosses, 12 Silver Stars, 20 Bronze Stars, 204 Purple Hearts, 9 Navy Commendations. The whole ship received the Presidential Unit Citation, and there's 291 combat ribbons. A total of 834 medals. So it was quite a deal. It's a wonder the ship didn't sink, really. But they shot, I believe, 4 or 5 torpedoes at us. Only 1 hit. They weren't very good at shooting torpedoes. But it was a slaughterhouse is what it was. We had 4 50 caliber machine guns up there. The guys that were in the gun mounts, which was, they couldn't do nothing. You can't, it's hard to knock down a jet with a 50. They were all killed or wounded. And I'm pretty bitter about what happened. We never had a congressional investigation. The mission statement of the Liberty Veterans Association is we would like Congress to investigate this, which never has. Now there's people that say there's been 6 investigations. That's not true. This last year, we contacted again the historians in the House and the historians in the Senate in Washington and asked them, has there ever been an investigation? And they responded, to their knowledge, there never has been, which we always knew that. In fact, we have a standing $10,000 reward if somebody could cough one up for us, right? It never has.
Yeah.
And I'm not anti-government, but it sure would be nice if a congressman would say, we got to look into this. Look at Benghazi, what, 4 investigations, public ones, but the Liberty, zip, nothing, so. I'm going to turn it over to Bryce. I mean,
Let's
Yeah, I got it.
This is what we want to do. We want to go ahead and have Bryce come up and speak, and then after they've both spoken, then we'll have them both come back up here and take your questions. Bryce is here today, and he was, I believe, the only Marine that survived, if I'm mistaken. I don't think there were too many Marines on the ship, but 3 of you, okay, you'll give us your perspective on this. Please, thank you so much again for coming today. All right, Bryce.
We have to have a commercial, that's just part of the deal.
Sure. Yeah.
We have some videos back there, if you see this pretty high school sweetheart of mine with the gray hair back there. This is Dead in the Water. It was produced by BBC Television in London, England, and has been shown several times on the History Channel. The History Channel charges $29.95 plus $6.95 shipping and handling. We have a friend of the Liberty Group that bought the rights to this and gave it to the Liberty Veterans Association. We're selling them for $10, and about $6 of that proceeds goes to our coffers. We have a book here by James Ennis Jr., Assault on the Liberty. This is the first book that came out and got us all together. James Ennis was the electronics officer. He was severely wounded, almost lost his life. It reads like a James Bond novel. Highly recommend it. No novel, true. And this book, are there any Republicans here?
Yeah.
Almost. I'm almost as well.
Barely, I think is what they're saying.
My mother was a Dewey. She was a cousin of Thomas E. Dewey, if any of you remember back that far. This book is written by Paul Finley, 22 years, U.S. Republican congressman from the state of Illinois, Abraham Lincoln's seat. It's a delightful read, especially for you ladies if you like romance, because the first 3 chapters are all about the courtship of his dear wife. During the Second World War, at the height of the invasion of Iwo Jima, there was a group of 5 Navy nurses that were put on a C-47 and they were flying to the island of Guam, and they were picking up very severely wounded Marines from the Iwo Jima invasion and hauling them to hospital in Honolulu, Hawaii. Paul Finley was a Navy supply officer, and he was on that plane with all those wounded Marines. He had work he had to do in Honolulu when he got there. They were both the same rank, but Lucille had a higher precedence number. When they got to Hawaii, Lucille said, "You're taking me to dinner tonight." When she passed away 2 years ago, they've been married 69 years. Paul is just a delight. There's a whole chapter in here on the Liberty incident. He lays the blame for September the 1st of 2001 directly on our own government failing to properly investigate the USS Liberty incident and giving license to the Israelis to do whatever they wanted, and they have done so. Now, folks, I have to tell you a little story. As the 6 Days of War was unwinding, it was almost like a football game was going on. If you were in the CT spaces, the communications technician spaces, just as you entered those spaces, there was a desk sitting there with a fellow by the name of Richard Carlson that was a United Arab Republic analyst. And he had a small United Arab Republic flag that he'd made out of a sheet of paper and stuck it in his outbasket. Back in those days, about 40% of people smoked, and in the Navy it's probably more like about 90%. But anyway, guys would go by out their Zippo cigarette lighter and, "Hey, Dick, what's happening to your Arabs anyway?" And they'd set fire to his flag and he'd jump up and slap it out and say, "You guys cut that out." Some young sailor took a whole bunch of teletype paper and Scotch taped it together and made a gigantic Star of David flag and hung it up on the starboard bulkhead in a processing reporting area. When the torpedo struck, it struck within a few feet of that Star of David flag. I joined the ship on the 1st of June. I was assigned temporary duty there from, actually my home base was in Bremerhaven, Germany. I had been on a mission with VQ-2, that's an airborne intelligence collection outfit, from Rota, Spain, and we were flying flights out of Keflavik, Iceland, overflying Soviet North Sea Fleet summer exercises. I was a Russian linguist. That problem dried up. They took the bird back to Rota, Spain, and this was the Memorial Day weekend of 1967. There was a barbecue and a beer bus for all the sailors and Marines. I've got to meet several of the Navy officers down there and had some wonderful discussions about the intelligence community and what was going on and so forth. And the 2 young Marines that worked for me, both Russian linguists on that trip, they said, "Hey, Sarge, let's go into town and have a few beers and pick up some women." Well, excuse me, I got stuck to that girl. Anyway, I said, "Oh, you guys stay out of trouble, but just go ahead and have a good..." "Oh, come on, go with us." "No, I'm going back to the barracks." So around 2 o'clock in the morning, here's this bang, bang, bang on my door, and I figured it's those 2 young buck sergeants giving the old Sarge a hard time. "Get out of here and leave me alone." Bang, bang, bang. Now I'm mad. I jump out of the boat, grab the door open, and there's a runner there from the officer of the day shack. He said, "Sergeant Lockwood?" "Yes." So we have orders here from Joint Chiefs of Staff here to join the USS Liberty at 0600 hours. Better get up and pack your sea bag. So I'm standing tall on the dock with my Samsonite suitcase. We were traveling in civilian clothes. I had one uniform, and that was the one I had on. These 2 young Marines that worked for me, here they come. If you'd gone into town with us, you wouldn't have been, they wouldn't have found you." Well, they would have. They would have searched dry docks and every bar in town until they found me. We sailed on the 2nd of June, and on the 8th we were attacked. I was standing by my bunk, stamping my name into some new t-shirts that I'd bought to get by, because all the rest of my stuff was civilian clothes. And I heard the first shell strike the ship. I'd never been under fire before, but there's a very distinctive sound of explosions against steel. the whole ship would ring. And I just dropped immediately what I was doing and ran for my GQ station, which was down below decks. There were some conversations. I remember when we had the GQ, a general quarters drill, at noon on that day. We had the senior chief of our division. We were all sitting around down there while the deck crew were doing their stuff. And I remember him saying, "You know what, I'm going to live forever." I looked at him kind of strangely, and I said, "What did you say?" And Chief Thompson says, "I'm going to live forever." He said, "I don't think anybody has ever really thought about it." And he said, "I have, and I'm not going to die. I'm going to live forever." Folks, in 2 hours, he's gone. We were at GQ when the 1MC, that's the public address system for the ship, captain came on and said, "Prepare yourself for torpedo attack starboard side." And I had a good friend of mine, Ronnie Campbell, that was sitting there, and we were kind of laughing about it. Well, we've been hit with everything else. What else can he hit us with? The assistant division officer stuck his head in the door and he said, "Sergeant Lockwood, would you come here a minute, please?" I stepped out into the passageway, and he and the operations officer had just got me into a conversation. We had these huge canvas ditching bags with brass furls all through them and a lead weight in the bottom. And we had to put all of our classified gear, and there were literally tons of it, into those ditching bags. And the idea was to run those up topside and pitch them over the side. Well, folks, that's a Marine's job to get shot at. And it just got me in that conversation when the torpedo struck. I was less than 10 feet from it, facing it. I was not crazy. I remember sitting on the deck, dizzy, and I thought, well, Lord, I guess this is it. I guess I'm coming home. At least Lois and the kids are taken care of. I heard a moan behind me, and I felt something cold around my legs, and I looked down rather stupidly, and there was water gushing in through a hole in a bulkhead that was ahead of me. And I thought, oh my God, we're in trouble. And I heard this moan behind me, and I looked around, and there was a sailor behind me that was trapped under some wreckage of what had been a sheet steel bulkhead that separated the office spaces for the intelligence people. I tried to get my arms under his armpits and pull him out. He was wedged in there tight. I tried a second time, and I couldn't get him out. By that time, the water was up to his neck. And I said, "Come on, you got to help me. I can't do it by myself." And I'm pulling and yanking, and he was starting to swallow seawater by that time. And I said, "Come on, get your feet under you and push. Come on, help me." And by that time, I'm shouting at him. I didn't realize it, and I didn't find out who it was until 25 years later. His name was Joe Lentini. He had been hit by a piece of shrapnel from one of the rockets that had penetrated all the way through the ship and struck him in the thigh. He sat on the deck and leaned up against the ladderway that went up to the next deck above. Was trying to put a tourniquet on that wound when the torpedo struck, pinned him under that wreckage. His left leg was propped up while he was trying to put that tourniquet on. When that bulkhead struck his leg, it just made toothpicks out of it. But he had enough consciousness left in him to where he could get his right leg under him, and he was able to push just enough to where it could get him free. And about that time, the water was almost to the overhead by then. We only had about 1.5 feet of airspace left. And I saw this body that was heading towards the hole and on out, and I reached down and got a hold of it. We had a lot of cabling and wire that was antenna wires and so forth that were hung by hangers from the overhead. And I had my left hand around those cables holding myself up and holding this other sailor up. And I said to Joe, I said, "Are you going to be all right? You going to be all right?" And his head was just kind of falling around. I said, yeah, I'm okay. And all the sailors were crowding onto this very narrow ladderway that led to the deck above. And they were all shouting and screaming, and there's a whole lot of confusion. We lost power. There was no light. We had a little bit of light, but I didn't find out until later that little bit of light was what was coming through the torpedo hole underwater. And I finally screamed as loudly as I could, "Knock it off! If you guys don't settle down, none of us will get out of here alive." I remember hearing the assistant division officer say, "This is Lieutenant Bennett, open this hatch." And apparently I passed out. Some of the other fellows told me later, said that I carried out one man, and against advice went back down. I don't remember any of that. I must have passed out because I don't remember any of that. But they said I went back down there. The only thing I remember was waking up and I was holding a sailor's head above water, and we were down there alone, and everything was dark. I tried to drag him up the ladderway. When the torpedo struck, it ruptured a fuel tank and heavy oil on board ship. That oil was everywhere, seawater was everywhere, and there was no light. I slipped on the ladderway and dropped him, and as the ship was rolling, there's a monstrous hole in the side of it. It was, I think, 32 by 46 feet, something like that. As that water sloshing around, it dragged him back out towards that torpedo hole, and I went and got him back, came back again, got part way up the ladder, and the railing to the ladderway had taken a piece of the torpedo and bent it way in. And that was just about where the water line was. I got to that place where it was bent, slipped and dropped him again. I had to go back and get him again. Finally got to the top of the ladderway, and the hatch was closed and sealed. And one of the sailors that was part of the deck force was set down by the captain to open that hatch. There was a scuttle hole in the center of the hatch, just about the width of a man's shoulder, so that you could get out of it. But if I had opened that hatch, I would have had to drop this guy, and he would have drowned, and that was not an option. So I'm holding up with one arm and pounding on the hatch with the other and cussing sailors. And Phil was kind enough to open the hatch to where I could get him out. We were told, for all of us that were severely wounded, to go up to the radio room. It was on the port side of the ship, and most of the attack was on the starboard side. I was lying on my back on the deck in the radio room, and I remember guys trying to tune the radios to get off of Mayday, and they were fussing about the jamming. One of them figured out that when the Israelis were shooting rockets at us, they could not turn on the jamming equipment because it would screw up the guidance for the rockets. They had shot up every transmitting we had on board ship, with one exception, a little old whip antenna that had not worked the entire cruise, and it had a bullet hole in it. One of the radiomen took a big old roll of coaxial cable out there and ran it back to that whip antenna while the Israeli torpedo boats were circling us, riddling us with heavy caliber machine gun fire. Hooked it up to that antenna, tuned up the transmitter, and got off of Mayday, and I was lying there listening to it. Firefox, Firefox, this is Rock Star, under attack by unidentified surface and naval air units. Require immediate assistance. And as soon as that Mayday was acknowledged, the shooting stopped. I remember seeing some sailors take 3 inflatable life rafts through the radio room and over to the port side. Then I heard a revving of diesel engines and a lot more machine gun fire. And one of those fellows came back in and he said, I don't know what we're going to do now. And what had happened is Israelis had machine gunned those life rafts, which is a violation of international law. They had severed the line to one of them, came up close and picked it up and carried it off with them. Now, none of us knew what was happening. I didn't know until the next morning. I was trying to help with the severely wounded later on, and I didn't find out until sometime later that there were 2 helicopters that came over. Heavy troop-carrying helicopters. Troops with machine gun belts, hand grenades hanging off them. The Israelis claim they sent them over to rescue personnel from the water. Well, what are you going to do with hand grenades? You're not going to rescue personnel in the water with hand grenades and machine gun belts. What you can do with that? Shoot sharks? There was a series of books that were financed by the Israelis, a couple of them called The Liberty Incident by a retired U.S. Navy captain. He was a reservist and a fighter pilot. He claims to have been a combat fighter pilot. He never saw combat. He was a bankruptcy judge from Miami, Florida. His name is A. Crystal. He made 17 trips to Israel investigating the USS Liberty incident and claimed in his book that it was a case of mistaken identity and so-called proves it. The excuses. You didn't see a flag. There was no breeze. The flag was standing still. We couldn't see the flag. It was obscured by smoke. Number one, they shot down 2 flags. We ran up 3. And the third one that we ran up was the holiday flag. For those of you that have been in the military, that's the biggest one you got on board ship. I think 8 by 15 feet is the size. I'm not exactly sure, but it's huge. When I went out on deck the next morning, that thing was flapping in a breeze. And there was destruction everywhere, human body parts lying all over the place. The folks on the front part of the ship where those gunners had been was red with blood. And I looked up and the flag was flapping in the breeze. Every time I hear the Star Spangled Banner, that part comes to my mind, the rockets, red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof of the night. Our flag was still there, folks. They claimed they were shooting at El Qasir. It was an Egyptian horse carrier from World War I, which had not left port for 20 years and was waiting to be cut up for scrap. Now, if you think the Israeli Mossad is dumb enough, by the way, the El Qasir was about 1/3 the size of the USS Liberty. U.S. ships are all painted in battleship gray. Egyptian ships are all painted black. And the markings on the hull are in Arabic script. Our letters were, GTR were 5 feet tall, and the figure 5 was 8 feet tall. Now, folks, you don't shoot at a ship at sea without going to Jane's, all the world's fighting ships, and looking up what you're shooting at. If any of you remember some of the films from World War II, one of them was Tora 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 and the other was Midway. It shows pictures of Japanese sailors drilling their troops on recognizing ships by only the silhouette. There is totally no difference between the silhouette of the USS Liberty and El Qasir. The Israelis claimed that there was
No difference or no similarity?
no similarity at all whatsoever. Oh, they were both ships.
Yeah.
The Israelis claimed that their troops were being shelled from the sea. We'll come to find out the so-called shelling was Israeli troops blowing up captured Egyptian ammunition. It was their own troops that were doing it. El Qasir only armament was a 4-inch muzzle loading cannon. No way in the world it can reach 13.5 nautical miles. Questions that come up. Well, why would Israel do this? I had a reporter from Israel Television call me. I was in Paul Findlay's home. He was talking about this book and doing a film on Paul Findlay's life when my cell phone rang. And it was a reporter from Israel Television. He kept saying to me on the phone, "We are friends. Why would Israel do this?" And I finally said to him, "You're in Israel. Why don't you find out?" Excuse me. Also in Judge Crystal's book, he claims that there have been 17 investigations. That is not true at all whatsoever. And Jack mentioned that we have the proof both from the Congressional Librarian and copies of congressional record that state that no investigation was ever done by Congress, which is required by our U.S. Constitution, by the way. Some 4 years ago, I was invited, we're living in Stratford, Missouri, and have for the past 14 years. Our United States Congressman, Roy Blunt, used to call Stratford his hometown, as folks lived there and ran a small farm there. Every Veterans Day, our local high school puts on a big shindig for all the veterans in town. They have the veterans and all their wives and families come by and feed them breakfast and go to the gymnasium, and they put on a big public display. Thank you, Hugh. There were 3 guest speakers that day. One of them was a fellow by the name of Lucas Shook, who had just graduated from Stratford High School, married a local girl, joined the Army, went to Iraq, and was horribly wounded in a roadside bomb. The whole side of his face was blown off. The kids gave him a standing ovation because they all knew him. I spoke on the USS Liberty incident. Folks, there were 821 large caliber strikes. I'm talking 40 millimeter cannon fire. That'd be a shell about this size, or larger, rockets, torpedo hoe in the side of the ship. There were 3,100 heavy caliber machine gun strikes on the ship, 30 millimeter. That is 2.5 times the size of our .50 caliber cartridge. There were bullet holes everywhere. And Israel claims it was a case of mistaken identity. I'm quite certain that all 3 of those Israeli motor torpedo boats had copies of Jane's all-the-world fighting ships. You just don't put out to sea in a warship without having that on board. There's a picture of the USS Liberty in there with everything about its engineering spaces, its armament, which happened to be 4 .50 caliber machine guns, and as Jack mentioned, that was absolutely no match against high-performance Mirage and Mystere aircraft that the Israelis were using at the time. They were attacking us with unmarked aircraft, which is a violation of international law. They were machine gunning our life rafts, our stretcher bearers, and our firefighters. That's a violation of international law. They were jamming our distress frequencies. That's a violation of international law. Back to the question about why. The morning of June 8th, the Israelis had captured an entire Egyptian brigade, in excess of 850 men, forced them to dig their own graves, brutally slaughtered them all. That is a serious violation of international law. And here's the USS Liberty sitting out there. Now we got a problem. There's a couple more reasons. There was a tacit agreement between the Johnson administration and the Israeli government not to attack Golan Heights. Golan Heights was occupied by Syria. Syria was backed by the Soviet Union and supplied by the Soviet Union. For the Israelis to attack Golan Heights would invite Soviet intervention, World War III. So there was a tacit agreement between the Johnson administration and the Israeli government to leave them be. With the USS Liberty out of the way, unable to do anything about it, Israel was free to attack the Golan Heights. They no longer had to use those troops in the Sinai Peninsula for guarding those captured Egyptian troops. They were moved up to Golan Heights and took it quite easily. Now, I'm not quite sure I can prove this, but I understand that there was an agreement between the Israeli government and the commanding general of the Syrian troops to pull his troops back. I understand he defected and is now living in France, very cushy lifestyle, courtesy of the American taxpayer through the Israeli government, so the Israelis could take Golan Heights. I don't blame Israel for wanting Golan Heights. For one reason or any reason or no reason, the Syrians would trot out their mortars and their artillery and pound Israel kibbutzes. So I don't blame them for that. But why slaughter 34 Americans? Why wound 174 Americans? Now there's some disagreement between the number of wounded, and the reason for that is 171 survivors that were walking wounded that were awarded the Purple Heart for being a combat wounded veteran. Since that time, there have been 3 more that were awarded. The radioman that went up there while the Israelis were circling us and machine gunning him, ran that coaxial cable back there, which we got off our Mayday on, just 4 years ago was awarded the Silver Star and his Purple Heart for those wounds. He refused medical treatment some 47 years ago when the action first took place. Now there's one other thing we need to talk about. We think there was an agreement between Lyndon Johnson and the Israelis to attack us. This is just speculation. But there's a book. Jack, could you tell me the name of that book that Peter Hoonem wrote? I forget the name of it now.
I'm not sure.
But he documents that prior to the attack on Liberty, America's nuclear arsenal was ordered to a state of readiness by Lyndon Johnson. And that was before we were attacked. I had a Jewish gentleman call me this past week, very wealthy Jewish gentleman, and he's doing his best. His name is Robert Kamansky. He was raised Orthodox Jew. He claims to be a Messianic Jew now. One of the things that he told me, he says, Bryce, when you give your speeches, you need to tell people that there's a difference. There are Jews and there are Zionists. And it's the Zionists that are in charge. I love Jews. Don't like the Zionists. I think that's about all I have to say. Charlie?
Again, if you have questions, please come over here. Jack, if you would please come up here. Go ahead, and we'll start with you, Hugh. And again, anyone else wants to ask a question, line up about 5 feet behind Hugh.
Okay, I wanted to thank you guys for the fine job of nomenclature and giving all that, yeah. Did everybody understand all those terms that they were using? Bulkhead? Yeah, you guys did great. Thank you very much. Okay, I got a few questions. In my studying this, the OOD, Officer of the Deck, I got that right, Captain? Okay, so the Officer of the Deck, he reported seeing planes flying, surveillance planes flying over the Liberty, coming in close, starting at 0600. That's 6 o'clock in the morning. And this went on until shortly before the attack. At, what time was it, 2?
1400 hours.
1400, so that's 2 o'clock. So, and you saw the planes yourself?
I did not know.
No? Okay.
Jack.
You would, Jack?
I seen some the day before and earlier that morning. Twice I seen them.
Okay. What brought you guys to actually start talking about it? Was the publication of the book?
For me, it was Jim Ennis's book right here. That's he waited until he retired to write the book, I believe.
Yeah, somebody let the cat out of the bag, and that brought you guys together?
Correct. For me, it did.
When I was in Bible college in Springfield, Missouri, incidentally, that's the same college that Jerry Falwell graduated from, if any of you are familiar with Jerry Falwell. Yeah. And my son-in-law, Steve, back here, graduated. My daughter graduated from the same college. In Christmas vacation of 1980, one of the fellows in my homiletics class had been in Texas over the Christmas holiday visiting family. And on the way back, he was listening to National Public Radio, the radio reader. And I'm sitting there first day of class after Christmas vacation, waiting for class to begin, waiting for the professor to come in. And he says, Bryce, were you on a ship that was torpedoed? And I said, how did you know about that? And he explained to me about hearing the radio reader, and he was reading that portion in there of the torpedo strike. And that was when I knew that there was a book out about it, but I couldn't find out the name or who wrote it or anything like that until about a year later. And in fact, I didn't find out until after that first reunion.
Thank you so much for being here. We are just indebted to you in so many ways, but for being here and sharing the truth about what went on. Were either one of you at the Medal of Honor ceremony for your captain?
I was not. I was discharged in 1972, actually.
Were you, Jack?
No, I wasn't. That was a travesty in itself.
Absolutely. Johnson was in the White House, and they awarded his Medal of Honor at some Navy Yard.
Navy Yard.
I think is he the only person who was living and not awarded by the president?
That's correct.
I thought that he was the
only
Medal of Honor winner who was alive, who was not, where it was not awarded by the president. It's
You're correct. The Medal of Honor is always awarded by the president. the crew or the unit gets to go to the White House, it is a huge ceremony. Our captain received it in the Washington Navy Yard by the Secretary of Navy, I believe, or somebody lower level. That was a slap in the face. I didn't know anything about it until after the ceremony. I doubt if there was a dozen people there. I don't know, you know. But if I could just say one thing before I forget, our Liberty Veterans Organization has a new website. This year we put it up. It's called the USS Liberty DocumentCenter.org. DocumentCenter.org. You go there. Item 3 is through the Freedom of Information. We had this paperwork released after 40-some years. This Dr. Kamansky is adamant about getting this paperwork released. There it is, black and white, CIA document dated November '67. And there it is, Mojan Dayan is the guy that authorized the attack. He was the general with the patch over his eye. There were sources in that meeting. He had a general and an admiral that were adamant about not doing it. He overrode them. He said, attack the ship and kill everybody. Black and white, smoking gun, end the conversation.
I would like to say that everything that the captain did up until the morning after the attack was absolutely above and beyond the call of duty. He richly deserved his Medal of Honor. Some years later, I think it was 1982, there was a story that ran on NBC News. It was called The Story Behind the Story, the attack on the USS Liberty. And there was a shot in there of our skipper with Admiral Kidd behind him stating that the attack only lasted about 8 minutes. Well, now, folks, excuse me, I have some pictures of the ship over here. Jack has several that were taken from Life magazine that show the side of the ship. You can, 3,100 heavy caliber machine gun strikes in 8 minutes. No. Excuse me, but our own captain was part of the cover-up. He had been passed over twice for captain. He was a commander, 05. He'd been passed over for 06 on 2 occasions. This is his last cruise. He's going to the boneyard. Suddenly, he gets promoted to full captain. He was given his choice of duty, the USS Kailua, which is an ammunition ship for Vietnam, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Now tell me he wasn't paid off handsomely to keep his mouth shut. And he never said anything until
Towards the end.
it was well over 30 years later before he said anything about it.
He's dying of cancer from that.
Jack said he was dying of cancer then. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions for you. One's for Jack. It was about the officer that told you to zip your lip. Was that action actually officially classified as secret or top secret?
When Admiral Kidd told us to keep our mouth shut?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that whole action classified?
He was standing there drinking coffee. I was in my underwear. He was in the engineering compartment. It was early morning. I don't think it was ever documented, but there's other sailors that were there.
But pursuant to that, after that, was it officially
I
classified?
can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
All of the Freedom of Information documents that have been released are stamped either secret or top secret and then scratched out.
Redacted, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. One more question. The raft that the Israelis towed away, what happened to that?
There's an Israeli museum in Haifa, Israel. That raft is there.
Like a trophy?
I'm sorry?
Like a trophy?
Like a trophy.
Yeah. And the ship's wheel from the torpedo boat that fired the torpedo that struck us is there. Incidentally, the skipper of the torpedo boat that fired the torpedo that killed all of my fellow Americans was the son of the Israeli admiral. And that admiral had stated, "Why, this is murder," and wouldn't go along with it. And then later, I think in that movie, Dead in the Water, you'll see that admiral on there, and he's talking up the Israeli line, and it was all accidental.
Final question right here.
Gunny, I've just got a couple of questions. One, since all the information is classified as top secret and not released, has the United States government ever publicly acknowledged that this happened?
They have publicly acknowledged that it happened, yes, but it was
ever acknowledged?
I'm sorry?
Has the Israeli government ever acknowledged?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they immediately apologized and said it was a case of mistaken identity.
Have they ever offered any reparations to sailors?
That's another story. Yes, Tom. They offered about $3 million in reparations for the families of those that were killed and the wounded. And there was another $6 million that was asked for by our own government for damage to the ship. Now, 1 year earlier, when the ship was put to sea and finished up her sea trials, our government had spent $26 million refitting her and putting all that fancy electronic gear in there. We had the most powerful computer mobile available on board ship, and that was not cheap. The Israelis offered to pay us $6 million. Now, some of you remember Adlai Stevenson, got beat twice for president. Adlai Stevenson III, his grandson, was a senator from Illinois, and there was a conversation between Jim Ennis, the author of Assault on the Liberty, about finally getting a congressional investigation going. And there have been several conversations back and forth between Mr. Ennis and Senator Stevenson. And all at once, Jim didn't hear anything, so he let it go for a couple of weeks, and he picks up the paper. And there's an article in there that the Israeli government agreed to pay $6 million in reparations for the USS Liberty. Apparently, IPAC got a hold of the senator and twisted his arm and said they would pay the reparations, and the case was closed. Now, here's the kicker. IPAC also petitioned our government to greatly increase aid to Israel. Guess what Congress did? We wound up paying ourselves.
Last year, at the Marine Corps birthday, you were selected by the Commandant of the Marine Corps to be an honored guest at their birthday party.
Actually, it was a Marine Cryptologic Support Battalion.
Is that the first public acknowledgement by the Marine Corps of your actions?
That's hard to say. Sorry, Tom, I don't know the answer to that, but
Okay, well, again, this is quite a story. Not only do we want to thank you for bringing these two heroes here, but we really want to thank them for coming here. I can tell it's still emotional. It's hard to share, and well, I can understand all of that. It appears to me that you all are probably pawns in a geopolitical thing that most of us don't understand and may never understand.
for you John Birchers, it's a classic false flag.
There you go. And, but thank you so much for coming. And again, folks, if you've not joined OPAC, please consider doing so. We're trying to root out all these good old boy things that happen in Oklahoma, like the big good old boy things that happen in Washington, D.C. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you.